The lighthouse stood like a sentinel against the storm, its beam cutting through the darkness as waves crashed against the rocky Maine coast. Inside, Marcus Whitmore pressed his weathered hands against the cold glass, watching something impossible unfold in the churning waters below. A small boat, barely visible through the rain, struggled against the tide with what appeared to be a lone figure at the helm. But it wasn't the boat that made his breath catch in his throat. It was what he could see through his binoculars. The figure wasn't alone. Bundled in the stern were 3 small forms, and clutched in the stranger's arms was a wicker basket that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As lightning illuminated the scene, Marcus saw something that would change everything he thought he knew about loss, redemption, and the messages the sea sometimes carries to those brave enough to listen. The keeper's quarters of Beacon Point Lighthouse had been Marcus Whitmore's sanctuary for 7 years, ever since the accident that claimed his wife and daughter. 7 years of solitude, of automated systems and weather reports, of meals eaten alone while the Atlantic crashed endlessly against the granite cliffs below. The lighthouse itself had been automated decades ago, but the Coast Guard maintained the station for weather monitoring and emergency coordination. It was the perfect job for a man who no longer wished to be part of the world. Marcus had once been different. Before the tragedy, he'd been Captain Marcus Whitmore of the Merchant Marine, a man who commanded respect on any dock from Boston to Bangor. He'd married his college sweetheart, Elena, and together they'd built a life filled with laughter and dreams. Their daughter, Sophia, had been the center of their universe, a precocious 8-year-old with Elena's dark eyes and his stubborn determination. The 3 of them had been planning to sail around the world once Marcus retired, to show Sophia the wonders beyond Maine's rocky shores. Then came that foggy October evening when their small sailboat never returned from what should have been a simple afternoon cruise. The Coast Guard found debris 3 days later. They found Elena's life jacket washed up near Bar Harbor. They never found Sophia. The official report cited equipment failure and sudden weather, but Marcus knew the truth that gnawed at him every sleepless night. He should have checked the radio more carefully, should have noticed the barometric pressure dropping, should have never taken them out that day. The guilt had consumed him like a slow fire, burning away everything he'd once been until only the shell remained. Friends stopped calling when he wouldn't answer. His mother stopped visiting when he refused to leave the lighthouse grounds. The world moved on, but Marcus remained frozen in that moment when he'd realized his family wasn't coming home. On this particular November evening, the storm building off the coast was unlike anything he'd seen in years. The Weather Service had issued multiple warnings, and Marcus had dutifully logged the readings every hour as the barometric pressure plummeted and wind speeds climbed toward hurricane force. The automated beacon swept its warning across waters that no sensible person would attempt to navigate, yet something deep in his mariner's instincts told him to keep watching. The first anomaly came at 9:47 p.m. His radar picked up a small signature struggling through the outer swells, moving against the storm with impossible determination. Marcus adjusted his equipment, thinking it might be debris or a wayward buoy, but the signal maintained course and speed. Through his high-powered binoculars, he could barely make out the shape of a small fishing boat, maybe 20 feet long, with someone at the wheel. His first instinct was to radio the Coast Guard, but something made him pause. The boat's movements were too purposeful, too directed. Whoever was out there wasn't lost or in distress. They were coming here, to Beacon Point, with single-minded determination that defied both logic and survival instincts. As the vessel drew closer, fighting through swells that should have swamped it hours ago, Marcus began to make out details that made his pulse quicken. The pilot appeared to be a woman, her long hair whipping in the wind as she gripped the wheel with both hands. But it wasn't just her presence that shocked him. In the stern of the boat, huddled beneath what looked like a tarp, were 3 small figures. Children from what he could see, though their faces were obscured by the storm. And then there was the basket. The woman held it against her chest with one arm while steering with the other, and even from his position high in the lighthouse, Marcus could see that it seemed to emit its own soft luminescence. Not electric light, but something organic like bioluminescence from deep-sea creatures. Every few seconds the glow would pulse brighter, as if responding to the rhythm of the waves or the woman's heartbeat. Marcus found himself moving without conscious thought, grabbing his rain gear and emergency kit. His body remembered protocols he hadn't used in years. muscle memory from his days commanding rescue operations. But as he prepared to descend to the rocky shore below, a voice in his head whispered warnings. 7 years of solitude had taught him to be suspicious of intrusions, especially ones that arrived in the middle of supernatural storms carrying impossible cargo. The descent to the small dock below the lighthouse was treacherous under the best conditions. Tonight, with rain turning the narrow path into a river and wind strong enough to lift a man off his feet, it bordered on suicidal. But something about the approaching boat compelled him forward, as if an invisible thread connected his fate to whatever message the storm was delivering. By the time Marcus reached the dock, the small fishing vessel was close enough for him to see the woman's face clearly. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with features that spoke of Irish ancestry and eyes that held a mixture of desperation and fierce determination. Her clothes were soaked through, and she moved with the careful economy of someone operating on the edge of exhaustion. The children in the stern were indeed young, possibly ranging from toddler to early elementary age, and they clung to each other with the practiced silence of those who'd learned that survival sometimes depended on invisibility. But it was the basket that held Marcus's attention. Up close, the glow was even more pronounced, pulsing in patterns that seemed almost like a code. The woman managed to guide her boat alongside the dock with skill that impressed Marcus, despite his growing unease. As she threw him the mooring line, their eyes met for the first time, and he felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that had nothing to do with familiarity and everything to do with shared understanding of loss. "Please," she called over the howling wind, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "We need shelter. Just for the night." Marcus caught the line and secured it, his hands moving automatically through knots he'd tied thousands of times. But his mind raced with questions and cautions. 7 years of isolation had made him wary of human contact, and everything about this situation screamed complexity he wasn't prepared to handle. "There's a storm shelter in town," he called back, having to shout to be heard. "Coast Guard station's better equipped for families." The woman shook her head vigorously, clutching the glowing basket tighter. "No official channels. Please, I can explain everything, but not here. Not in the open." One of the children, a girl who couldn't have been more than 5, looked up at Marcus with eyes that reminded him painfully of Sophia. The resemblance was probably his imagination, but it hit him like a physical blow. All 3 children were watching him, with the kind of hope that children reserve for adults they believe might save them. Against every instinct developed over 7 years of carefully maintained isolation, Marcus found himself nodding. "Can you make it up the path? It's steep and slippery." Relief flooded the woman's face. "Yes, we can manage. Thank you." As she helped the children from the boat, Marcus got his first clear look at what they were carrying beyond the mysterious basket. Each child had a small backpack, and the woman carried what appeared to be a leather satchel that she protected almost as carefully as the glowing container. Everything about their possessions suggested hasty departure and careful selection of only the most essential items. The climb back to the lighthouse tested everyone's endurance. The youngest child, a boy of perhaps 3, had to be carried part of the way. The woman took turns with Marcus, though she never relinquished her grip on the basket. The older girl, who seemed to be around 7, helped her middle sibling, a boy of maybe 5, navigate the more treacherous sections of the path. By the time they reached the lighthouse keeper's quarters, all of them were thoroughly soaked and shivering. Marcus's living space, spartanly furnished and designed for one, suddenly felt cramped with 4 additional occupants. But he moved automatically through the motions of hospitality he'd nearly forgotten, stoking the fire, putting on coffee, gathering towels and blankets. The woman settled the children near the fireplace, speaking to them in low, soothing tones. Marcus caught fragments of what sounded like Gaelic mixed with English, a linguistic blend that added another layer to the mystery. As warmth began to fill the room and the children's shivering subsided, he got his first good look at his unexpected guests. The woman was beautiful in the way that strength and determination could make anyone beautiful, but it was a beauty marked by recent hardship. Her hands showed signs of rough work, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of nights without sleep. The children, while clearly well cared for, had the slightly hollow look of those who'd been living on uncertainty for some time. But it was still the basket that drew Marcus's attention. Now that they were inside, and he could observe it more closely, The glow seemed to pulse in response to the woman's emotional state. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When she relaxed slightly, the light dimmed. When one of the children stirred restlessly, it brightened. "I'm Marcus," he said finally, offering the simplest introduction possible. The woman looked up from where she was helping the youngest boy out of his wet clothes. Fiona MacReady, these are my children. Aiden, she indicated the toddler. Bridget, the little girl. And Cormac. The middle boy raised his hand in a shy wave. Something about the way she introduced them made Marcus wonder if those were their real names, but he didn't press. In his experience, people running from something often carried multiple identities, and he wasn't in a position to judge anyone's survival strategies. "What's in the basket?" he asked instead, deciding that direct questions might be more productive than polite conversation. Fiona's arms tightened protectively around the container. "Something that belongs to your family." The words hit Marcus like a cold wave. "My family's dead." "I know," Fiona said softly. "That's why we're here." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Marcus wasn't ready to process. He'd spent 7 years building walls against hope, against the possibility that the universe might still hold surprises capable of healing rather than destroying. The idea that strangers could arrive carrying something connected to Elena and Sophia felt like either a miracle or a cruel joke. "That's impossible," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. Fiona reached into her leather satchel and withdrew a photograph, edges worn from handling. She held it out to Marcus, who took it with trembling fingers. The image showed Elena and Sophia on the deck of their sailboat, both smiling at the camera. It was a picture he'd taken himself just weeks before the accident. One that had been in Elena's purse and presumably lost with everything else. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely a whisper. "It's complicated," Fiona said, "but I promise you, everything I'm about to tell you is true, no matter how impossible it sounds." She gestured toward the children, who had arranged themselves in a semicircle around the fire, watching the adults with the serious attention of those who'd learned that grown-up conversations often determined their immediate futures. "These aren't my biological children, Marcus. I've been caring for them, protecting them, but they're not mine." Marcus looked at the 3 young faces more carefully. Now that Fiona mentioned it, he could see that while they clearly cared for each other and for her, there wasn't the casual intimacy of biological family. They interacted more like survivors who'd formed a protective unit out of necessity. "Whose are they?" "They belong to families who trusted me with their most precious possessions," Fiona said. "Families who needed someone to carry their children to safety when staying meant certain danger." The implication was clear, though Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to understand it fully. "You're running from something." "Someone," Fiona corrected. "And we've been running for months. But this," she touched the basket gently, "this has been guiding us here. To you." Despite every rational thought screaming warnings, Marcus found himself leaning forward. "What is it?" Instead of answering directly, Fiona began to unfasten the intricate knots that secured the basket's lid. The glow intensified as she worked, and Marcus could swear he heard something like music, too faint to identify but unmistakably melodic. The children moved closer, their faces reflecting the increasing light. 7 years ago, Fiona said as she worked, "your wife and daughter didn't die in that storm." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. Don't you dare." "They were rescued," Fiona continued, her voice gentle but insistent, "by people who specialize in helping those the world believes are lost. Elena lived for 3 more years. She gave birth to another daughter." Marcus backed toward the door, his mind rejecting what he was hearing. "This is insane. You're insane. I saw the debris." The Coast Guard confirmed. "The Coast Guard found what they were meant to find," Fiona said. "Evidence of an accident, but not the whole truth." Her fingers continued working at the basket's fastenings. "Elena spent those 3 years hoping you'd find a way to move on, to find peace. But she also spent them creating something for you, something she hoped would help you understand that love doesn't end with loss. The final knot came free, and Fiona slowly lifted the basket's lid. The light that spilled out was warm and golden, like sunlight through honey, and it filled the room with a presence that made Marcus's knees weak. Inside the basket, nestled in what appeared to be silk that moved with its own gentle current, was a collection of objects that made his heart stop. A child's drawing, executed in crayon on paper that somehow remained pristine despite its apparent age. The image showed a lighthouse, a boat, and 3 figures standing together under a rainbow. In a child's unsteady handwriting, words were spelled out along the bottom. For Daddy, love Sophia and baby Rose. Beneath the drawing was a folded letter in Elena's unmistakable handwriting, sealed with wax that bore the impression of her grandmother's ring, the one she'd been wearing when she disappeared. And wrapped in a small blanket that Elena had knitted during her pregnancy with Sophia was something that made Marcus's breath catch entirely. A lock of hair. 2 locks, actually. One, the familiar golden brown of Sophia's curls, and another of a slightly different shade, darker and finer. Baby hair. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, but his hands were already reaching toward the basket. "Elena named her Rose," Fiona said softly. "She has your eyes and Elena's determination. She's 4 years old now, and she knows all about her father who tends the lighthouse and watches over sailors." Marcus's fingers touched the letter, and he swore he could feel Elena's presence in the paper, as if her love had somehow been woven into the very fibers. "Where are they?" "Elena passed 2 years ago," Fiona said, and Marcus felt his newly rebuilt hope crumble. But peacefully, surrounded by people who loved her. She'd been ill for some time. "But Rose..." Fiona paused, her own emotions clearly struggling. "Rose is safe. She's been living with a family who specialize in protecting children who exist outside normal systems." "I don't understand any of this," Marcus said, though he was opening the letter with trembling fingers. If they survived, if Elena lived, why didn't she contact me? Why didn't she come home? "Read the letter," Fiona said gently. "She explains everything better than I can." Marcus unfolded the pages, and Elena's voice seemed to speak directly to his heart through the familiar loops and angles of her handwriting. "My dearest Marcus, if you're reading this, then Fiona found you, and the plan we hoped would never be necessary has been set in motion. I know you must have questions, and anger, and grief that you thought you'd already processed. I know this must feel like losing me all over again, but please read everything before you judge the choices I made. The storm that night wasn't natural, though the official reports made it seem so. We were taken from the water by people who exist in the shadows of the world, people who help those who need to disappear for their own protection. I can't explain everything in a letter, but what I can tell you is that I discovered something I shouldn't have, something that put all 3 of us in danger. The choice was made for me in that moment when our boat was sinking. I could let us all die, or I could accept help that meant we could never return to our old lives. I chose survival, Marcus, but it was the hardest choice I've ever made because it meant leaving you behind. I want you to know that not a day passed that I didn't think of you, didn't dream of finding a way back, but the people who saved us explained that contact would put you in the same danger that had threatened us. So I waited, and I hoped, and I tried to build a life for Sophia in the strange new world we'd been pulled into. Sophia adapted better than I did. Children are resilient in ways that humble adults. She made friends, learned skills I never could have imagined, and never stopped talking about her daddy, who took care of the lighthouse. She drew you pictures constantly, and we would sit together looking at maps, trying to guess what you were doing at that exact moment. When I discovered I was pregnant again, I almost broke every rule and contacted you. But the people protecting us convinced me that bringing you into our world would destroy the peace you'd found. They were wrong about that, weren't they? I know you, Marcus. I know the guilt you must have carried, the isolation you must have chosen. I know you blame yourself for something that was never your fault. Rose was born healthy and perfect, with your stubborn chin and your way of studying everything with serious concentration before breaking into the most beautiful smile. Sophia loved her instantly and appointed herself as the most devoted big sister imaginable. Watching them together was my greatest joy and my deepest sorrow, because I knew you were missing it all. When I got sick, I had time to prepare. Time to make arrangements and write letters and create this basket that I hope will find its way to you. The people in our community have abilities that seem impossible, but they're real, and they've promised me that this collection of our love will find you when the time is right. By the time you read this, Sophia will be gone too. The same illness that took me, though hers progressed more quickly. She was brave until the end, Marcus. She made me promise to tell you that she wasn't afraid because she knew she'd see you again someday, and she'd have so many stories to tell you about the adventures she'd had. Rose is safe with people who will love her as if she were their own, but she needs to know her father. She needs to understand where she comes from and why she has your eyes and your stubborn streak. Most importantly, she needs to know that she was wanted, that she was conceived in love, even if circumstances kept us apart. I'm trusting Fiona with everything that matters most to me. She's not just a messenger, Marcus. She's become family to Rose, and she's made promises that I believe she'll keep even at great personal cost. The children with her aren't hers biologically, but they're hers in every way that matters, and they're all in danger because of the people who are hunting for Rose. I need you to understand that Rose isn't just your daughter. She's the key to something much larger, something that the wrong people would use to hurt innocent families, like the ones Fiona is protecting. The people who saved us years ago are gone now, defeated by those who see children like Rose as weapons instead of miracles. Fiona will explain what she can, but the most important thing you need to know is this. Our daughter needs her father, not just for love, but for protection. The abilities that kept us hidden for 7 years are growing stronger in her, and without proper guidance, they could put her and everyone around her in terrible danger. I know this is overwhelming. I know it changes everything you thought you knew about loss and grief and moving forward. But I also know you, Marcus Whitmore. I know the man who spent 3 days searching for us without sleep. I know the husband who learned to braid hair and paint fingernails because his daughter asked him to. I know the father who would do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep his family safe. Rose is your family. These children with Fiona are now your family. The community of people trying to protect them is your family. And somewhere in the impossible space between grief and hope, I believe you'll find room for the love that has been waiting for you all this time. The basket contains more than objects, Marcus. It contains 7 years of bedtime stories about Daddy, 7 years of prayers that you would find peace, and 7 years of love that never dimmed. Let it guide you toward the life you were meant to live, the life where being a lighthouse keeper means something entirely different from what you've believed. I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. Elena P.S. Sophia wanted me to tell you that she figured out the answer to the riddle you used to ask her. What's the difference between a lighthouse and a star? She said a lighthouse brings people home to where they belong, but a star shows them where they're going. She was always too smart for her own good. Marcus read the letter 3 times before his hands stopped shaking enough to set it down. When he looked up, Fiona was watching him with eyes that held their own grief, their own impossible stories. The children had fallen asleep in front of the fire, exhausted by their journey and lulled by the warmth and safety of the lighthouse. "She's really gone?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Both of them," Fiona confirmed softly. "But they lived, Marcus. They had 7 years of life that wouldn't have existed without the choice Elena made. And Rose—" She paused, reaching into the basket to pull out another photograph, this one more recent. "Rose is extraordinary." The picture showed a little girl with Marcus's dark eyes and Elena's smile, standing beside a woman who was clearly Fiona, though she looked younger and less careworn. Behind them was a garden that seemed to shimmer with its own light, and in Rose's outstretched hand, a butterfly with wings that appeared to be made of living starlight rested as if it belonged there. "The abilities Elena mentioned," Marcus said slowly. "What exactly are we talking about?" "Rose can communicate with living things," Fiona explained. "Plants, animals, even the sea itself. It's a gift that runs in certain bloodlines, but it's also something that makes her incredibly valuable to people who would use her for terrible purposes." Marcus studied the photograph, trying to reconcile the image of his impossible daughter with everything he thought he understood about the world. "And you've been protecting her?" "Along with others like her," Fiona said. "There is an entire community of us, Marcus. Families who've learned to live outside normal systems because our children don't fit into normal categories. We've been safe for years, but recently—" She gestured toward the sleeping children. Everything changed. These three? Aiden can sense people's emotions from impossible distances, which makes him invaluable for early warning systems. Bridget can manipulate light itself, bend it and shape it in ways that can hide entire buildings. And Cormac can communicate with technology as if it were alive. Fiona's voice dropped to a whisper. There are people who would pay any price to control children with these abilities. Marcus looked at the three small forms curled together by his fireplace, and something protective stirred in his chest that he hadn't felt since Sophia was small. What do you need from me? Sanctuary, Fiona said simply. At least temporarily. This lighthouse is perfect because it's isolated but official, hidden but legitimate. We need time to figure out our next move. And Rose needs time to get to know her father before... She trailed off. Before what? Before we have to decide whether to keep running or make a stand. The weight of everything settled on Marcus's shoulders like a familiar burden, but this time it didn't feel crushing. Instead, it felt like purpose, like the reason he'd been keeping this lonely vigil for 7 years without understanding why. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but Marcus could see that this was just the beginning of a much larger tempest. His quiet life of routine and solitude was over, replaced by something far more complex and dangerous. But as he looked at the basket with its impossible gifts, at the photograph of the daughter he'd never known existed, and at the woman who'd risked everything to bring them to him, he realized that some storms were worth sailing into. How long do we have? He asked. I don't know, Fiona admitted. Maybe days, maybe weeks. They're good at tracking, but this place is well hidden, and you have official status that might provide some protection. Marcus nodded, his mind already shifting into the strategic thinking that had once made him a successful ship's captain. We'll need supplies, better communication equipment, and a plan for if they find us. You're willing to help? The question surprised him. Fiona, you've just told me I have a 4-year-old daughter who needs protection from people who would use her as a weapon. You've brought me proof that Elena lived for 3 more years than I thought, that she never stopped loving me, and that everything I've believed about loss and guilt has been wrong. He stood, moving to the window where the lighthouse beam continued its eternal rotation. I've been waiting 7 years for a reason to stop just existing and start living again. This is it. As if in response to his words, the basket pulsed with warm light, and for just a moment, Marcus could swear he felt Elena's presence in the room, approving and proud. The children stirred in their sleep, and Fiona smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Rose is going to love meeting you, she said. When? Soon. There's a safe house about 6 hours north, where she's been staying with guardians. But first, we need to make sure this place is secure, and figure out how to contact the others without revealing our location. Marcus turned from the window, looking at his transformed living space. 7 years of solitude had ended in a single night, replaced by purpose and possibility he'd never imagined. It terrified him and exhilarated him in equal measure. Tell me everything, he said. About Rose, about the people hunting you, about this community you've been part of. If I'm going to protect my daughter, I need to understand exactly what we're up against. Fiona settled back in her chair, checking once more that the children were sleeping peacefully. Outside, the storm continued to dissipate, but inside the lighthouse, a new chapter was beginning for all of them. As she started to speak, her words weaving a tale of hidden communities and extraordinary children, of love that transcended death and hope that survived the impossible, Marcus felt something he'd forgotten was possible. He felt like he was coming home. Dawn broke gray and uncertain over Beacon Point, the storm's fury replaced by an uneasy calm that seemed to press against the lighthouse windows like a held breath. Marcus had not slept. Instead, he'd spent the hours before sunrise walking the perimeter of his property, checking sightlines and escape routes with the tactical mind of a man who'd once navigated dangerous waters for a living. The weight of his Colt, 45 against his hip, felt both foreign and familiar after years of peaceful isolation. Inside the keeper's quarters, Fiona moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast, while the 3 children still slept curled together on the makeshift bed Marcus had arranged near the fireplace. She worked with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to managing a household under uncertain circumstances, but Marcus noticed how her eyes constantly flicked toward the windows, monitoring approaches he couldn't see. The radio crackled to life at exactly 0600, startling them both. Coast Guard Station Southwest Harbor checking in for the routine morning weather report. Marcus had maintained this ritual for 7 years, but today the familiar routine felt like a lifeline to normalcy in a world that had fundamentally shifted overnight. Beacon Point. This is Southwest Harbor. Requesting morning conditions report. Over. Marcus keyed the microphone, forcing his voice into the steady cadence of official communications. Southwest Harbor, Beacon Point. Winds northwest at 15 knots, seas 3 to 5 feet, visibility 10 miles, barometric pressure steady at 30. 24 and rising. Storm system has moved offshore, conditions improving. Over. Copy that, Beacon Point. Any damage to report from last night's weather? Marcus glanced at Fiona, who had frozen in place, clearly understanding that any mention of visitors could complicate their situation exponentially. Negative. Southwest Harbor. All systems operational, no damage observed. Over. Roger that. Have a good day, Marcus. Southwest Harbor out. As he replaced the microphone, Marcus caught Fiona's look of relief mixed with something else. Gratitude, perhaps, but also a deeper recognition that he'd already begun making choices that aligned him with her cause rather than official protocols. How long before they expect your next check-in? She asked quietly. 1,800 hours, unless there's weather or an emergency. Marcus poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, adding cream to hers without asking. Somehow he'd remembered her preference from the night before, a small detail that suggested his mind was already adapting to having others to consider. That gives us 12 hours to figure out our next move. Our next move? Fiona raised an eyebrow, testing the boundaries of their newly formed alliance. You said Rose needs to meet her father. I said I'd protect my daughter. Marcus met her gaze steadily. That makes this our problem now, not just yours. Before Fiona could respond, a small voice piped up from the makeshift bed. Is it morning? Can we see the light turn on again? Bridget sat up, her dark hair tousled with sleep, but her eyes alert and curious. Unlike many children waking in a strange place, she showed no fear or disorientation, only the adaptability of someone who'd learned that home was wherever the people protecting her happened to be. The light runs automatically now, Marcus explained, moving to sit on the edge of the bed as the other 2 children stirred awake. But I can show you how it works, if you'd like. Cormac, the middle boy, sat up with sudden interest. Does it have computers? Can I see them? Cormac, Fiona warned gently, but Marcus was already nodding. The whole operation is computerized. Weather monitoring, automated beacon controls, even the fog signals. He studied the boy's eager expression. You understand technology? He doesn't just understand it, Fiona said, helping little Aiden to his feet. He communicates with it. Machines respond to him like they're alive. As if to demonstrate, Cormac glanced toward the radio equipment, and immediately the morning weather band began cycling through channels without anyone touching the controls. Weather reports from stations across New England streamed through the speakers in rapid succession until the boy concentrated, and the radio settled on a classical music station, filling the room with gentle piano music. That's impossible, Marcus said, though he was already learning that impossible had become a relative term. Yesterday you would have said a basket that glows with trapped memories was impossible too, Fiona pointed out. But you held Elena's love in your hands. The mention of his wife's name still hit like a physical blow, but now it carried hope alongside the pain. Elena had lived. She'd given birth to another daughter. Somewhere, probably less than a day's journey away, that daughter was waiting to meet the father she'd been told about but never known. When do we leave for the safe house? Marcus asked. Fiona hesitated, glancing toward little Aiden, who had wandered to the window and was staring out at the ocean with unusual intensity for a 3-year-old. There's something we need to discuss first, about what it means to bring you into our world permanently. I thought that decision was already made. For you, perhaps. But there are others involved. People who've risked everything to build the network that keeps children like these safe. Fiona moved to stand beside Aiden, following his gaze toward the horizon. They'll need to approve you, Make sure you understand the rules and the risks. What kind of rules? Complete secrecy about abilities and locations. No contact with former life except through approved channels. Absolute commitment to the community's protection, even if it means giving up personal desires. Fiona's voice grew heavy. And acceptance that if you're compromised, if they find you because of something you did or failed to do, the entire network could collapse. Marcus absorbed this, understanding that she was outlining the terms of a permanent exile from the world he'd known. But then he'd already been living in exile for 7 years. The difference was that this exile would have purpose. What happens if I don't agree to the rules? Then we disappear again, Fiona said simply. And you never see Rose. And you spend the rest of your life knowing your daughter is out there somewhere, unprotected, while you're safe and comfortable in your lighthouse. The choice wasn't really a choice at all, and they both knew it. Marcus had spent 7 years believing his family was dead, building a life around that loss. Now he'd learned that part of his family was still alive, still in danger, still needing him. There was no universe in which he would choose comfort over his child's safety. How do we contact them? Fiona smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her. We don't contact them, they contact us. She nodded toward Aiden, who was still staring fixedly at the ocean. Tell Marcus what you're feeling, sweetheart. The little boy turned from the window, his expression serious beyond his years. People coming. In a big boat. They feel... He paused, searching for words. They feel like family, like when Mama Fiona hugs us. Safe feelings. Marcus moved to the window, using his binoculars to scan the horizon. At first he saw nothing but empty ocean. But gradually a small speck became visible, growing larger as it approached. Not a Coast Guard vessel or local fishing boat, but something sleeker, faster, purpose-built for stealth rather than visibility. How long has he been able to sense them? Marcus asked. About 20 minutes, Fiona replied. His range is extraordinary. Normal empaths might sense emotions across a room. Aiden can feel them across miles. The implications were staggering. A child who could provide early warning of approaching threats, or conversely, detect allies long before they became visible. No wonder people would pay any price to control such an ability. Are they friendly or hostile? Friendly, Aiden said with the certainty that only small children possess. They have someone with them who feels like sunshine after rain. Someone happy to come home. Marcus's heart began to pound as understanding dawned. Rose. Rose, Fiona confirmed. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Fiona helped the children wash and dress while Marcus secured the lighthouse's automated systems and prepared the dock for visitors. Every few minutes he found himself checking his reflection in windows or mirrors, trying to see himself through the eyes of a 4-year-old daughter who knew him only through bedtime stories and Elena's memories. What would she think of his graying hair, his weathered hands, his voice roughened by years of minimal conversation? Would she see the father Elena had described, or just a stranger who happened to share her eyes? The boat that finally approached the dock was unlike anything Marcus had seen in local waters. Sleek and silent, it moved through the swells with the efficiency of military design, but none of the aggressive lines of a warship. As it drew closer, he could make out several figures on deck, including a small one with bright blonde hair who was bouncing with barely contained excitement. "Daddy! Daddy Lighthouse!" The voice carried clearly across the water, high and sweet and filled with joy that hit Marcus like a physical force. Rose was standing at the boat's bow, held securely by an adult but waving frantically toward the lighthouse. Even from a distance, Marcus could see Elena in the child's enthusiastic gestures, his own stubborn determination in the way she'd positioned herself for the best possible view. The boat tied up with military precision and its passengers disembarked with the coordinated efficiency of a team that had worked together for years. Marcus counted 5 adults, all moving with the alert grace of people accustomed to danger, all focused on protecting the small figure who had immediately broken free and was running up the dock toward him. Rose stopped just short of collision, suddenly shy in the face of the moment she'd been anticipating her entire life. She was small, even for 4, with Elena's delicate features and Marcus's dark eyes, wearing practical clothes that had clearly been chosen for travel rather than appearance. But it was her expression that undid him completely. Wonder and hope and just a touch of uncertainty, as if she couldn't quite believe that dreams really did come true. "Are you really my daddy?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Marcus knelt to bring himself to her eye level, his throat too tight for speech. Instead, he nodded and held out his arms, hoping she would bridge the gap between them. For a moment she hesitated, studying his face with the serious concentration he'd seen in Elena's photograph. Then recognition dawned, and she launched herself into his embrace, with the complete trust that only children possess. She smelled like sunshine and salt water, and something indefinably sweet that he realized must be uniquely hers. Her small arms circled his neck with surprising strength, and when she whispered, "I dreamed about you every night," Marcus felt something break open in his chest that had been locked away for 7 years. "I dreamed about you too," he managed to say. "I just didn't know it yet." The reunion was interrupted by the approach of the other passengers, led by a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She moved with purpose but not hostility, her eyes taking in the lighthouse grounds with professional assessment. "Marcus Whitmore," she said, extending her hand in greeting. "I'm Dr. Catherine Webb. I've been Rose's guardian since Elena passed, and I'm the coordinator for our Eastern Regional Network." Marcus stood, keeping Rose in his arms as she seemed disinclined to let go. "Dr. Webb, Fiona's told me some of what you do, but I suspect there's more to discuss." "Considerably more," she agreed. "But first, let me introduce the others." She gestured to her companions, who had arranged themselves in a defensive perimeter that appeared casual but was clearly anything but. Security specialists, medical support, and communications experts. "We don't travel light when transporting high-value assets." The clinical terminology made Marcus's jaw tighten. "You mean children?" "I mean children with abilities that make them incredibly valuable to the wrong people," Dr. Webb corrected firmly. "And if you're going to be part of this network, you need to understand the difference. Rose isn't just your daughter. She's a strategic asset in a war most people don't know is being fought." "What kind of war?" "The war between those who would protect extraordinary children and those who would exploit them." Dr. Webb's expression grew grim. "And right now, we're losing." Rose had been listening to the adult conversation with the focused attention of a child who'd learned that grown-up talk often determined her immediate future. Now she tugged on Marcus's shirt to get his attention. "Daddy, can I show you what I can do? Mama Catherine says you might not believe it at first, but it's really me doing it, not tricks." Marcus looked down at his daughter, this impossible gift he'd never known existed, and realized that he was about to witness abilities that would fundamentally change his understanding of what was possible in the world. "Show me, sweetheart." Rose wriggled to be put down, then walked to the edge of the dock where the ocean stretched toward the horizon. She knelt and placed her small hands flat against the weathered wood, closing her eyes in concentration. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water around the dock began to glow with soft bioluminescence, as if the ocean itself was welcoming her touch. But that was only the beginning. Fish began to surface, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds, creating a living carpet of marine life that surrounded the dock in a perfect circle. Seals appeared from deeper water, their whiskered faces watching Rose with what looked like adoration. Even the seabirds changed their patterns, forming graceful spirals in the air above her head. "The ocean loves her," Fiona said softly, moving to stand beside Marcus. "All life loves her. It's not just communication, it's connection. She can feel what they feel, and they respond to her emotional state." Marcus watched his daughter conducting an orchestra of living creatures with nothing more than her presence, and felt his worldview reshaping itself around the reality of her gift. This wasn't magic or illusion. This was a fundamental connection to life itself, a bridge between human consciousness and the wild systems that surrounded them. "How is this possible?" he asked Dr. Webb. "We don't fully understand the mechanism," she admitted. "Genetic factors seem to play a role, but it's not purely hereditary." Environmental triggers, traumatic events, even simple random chance can activate latent abilities. What we do know is that children like Rose are becoming more common, and their abilities are becoming stronger. Rose opened her eyes and stood, immediately causing the marine life to disperse in orderly fashion, as if following unspoken instructions. She returned to Marcus with a bright smile, clearly pleased with his amazed expression. "Did you like it, Daddy?" "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Marcus said honestly, lifting her back into his arms. "But why does it make you special to bad people?" Rose's expression grew serious, and Marcus could see Elena's thoughtfulness in the way she considered her answer. "Mama Catherine says some people want to use my friends to hurt other people, like making fish swim into nets they can't escape, or making birds spy on people who want to be private." The applications were obvious and horrifying. A child who could control marine life could disrupt shipping lanes, destroy fishing industries, even guide military operations. Birds who responded to human direction could become surveillance networks impossible to detect or defend against. And if Rose's abilities continued to develop, "There are others like her." "Dozens that we know of," Dr. Webb replied. "Probably hundreds we haven't found yet. And then there are the ones who've been taken." "Taken?" "By people who've figured out what these children can do and decided to use them as weapons or tools." Dr. Webb's voice grew heavy. "We call them collectors. They're organized, well-funded, and completely ruthless. They've been hunting our network for months, getting closer each time." Marcus felt Rose's small hand touch his cheek and realized his expression had grown frightening. He forced himself to smile for her benefit, but his mind was racing with tactical considerations. If organized groups were hunting these children, then the lighthouse's isolation was both an advantage and a vulnerability. They'd be hard to find, but if discovered, they'd be difficult to evacuate quickly. "How much time do we have?" "Unknown," Dr. Webb admitted. "Our intelligence suggests they're focusing on the Pacific Northwest right now, but that could change. They've demonstrated the ability to track our movements, though we're not sure how." "Could be technological," suggested one of her companions, a younger man with the alert bearing of military training. "Satellite surveillance, communications intercepts, financial tracking. Or it could be supernatural," added another team member. "If they have children with abilities working for them, either voluntarily or under coercion, they might be using enhanced senses to hunt us." The possibilities were endless, and all of them disturbing. Marcus looked down at Rose, who had begun humming softly while watching the ocean, apparently unconcerned with the adult conversation swirling around her. Her innocence was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She had no idea that her gift made her a target, no concept of the dangerous world adults were navigating on her behalf. "What do you need from me?" Marcus asked Dr. Webb. "First, commitment. This isn't a temporary arrangement. Once you're fully integrated into our network, there's no going back to your old life. The lighthouse keeper, who makes weather reports and lives alone, will cease to exist." Marcus nodded, having already understood this reality. "What else?" "Your expertise. We need safe houses that appear completely legitimate to outside observation. Your lighthouse is perfect because it has official status and a plausible reason for isolation. But we need someone who understands how to maintain that cover while housing extraordinary children. And, eventually, combat readiness." Dr. Webb's expression grew grim. "We hope it won't come to that, but hope isn't a strategy. If the collectors find us, we need to be prepared to fight." Marcus had served in the merchant marine during conflicts in the Middle East, knew how to handle weapons and small unit tactics, but the idea of combat operations involving children was something else entirely. Still, if the alternative was allowing Rose and the others to be captured and exploited, "I understand." Dr. Webb studied his face, apparently satisfied with what she saw there. "Good. Then let's discuss immediate arrangements. We need to establish the lighthouse as a fully operational safe house, which means secure communications, enhanced security measures, and protocols for emergency evacuation." The next several hours were spent in detailed planning. Dr. Webb's team proved to be remarkably thorough, identifying vulnerabilities Marcus had never considered, and proposing solutions that would maintain the lighthouse's civilian appearance while dramatically improving its defensive capabilities. Rose stayed close to Marcus throughout the discussions, sometimes sitting in his lap, sometimes playing quietly with small toys she'd brought in a backpack that had apparently been packed specifically for meeting her father. She seemed content to simply be near him, as if his presence was a gift she'd been waiting for all her life. During a break in the strategic planning, Marcus took Rose up into the lighthouse itself, showing her the automated beacon and the weather monitoring equipment that Cormac had found so fascinating. She listened with serious attention as he explained how the light helped ships navigate safely, nodding as if the concepts made perfect sense to her 4-year-old mind. "Mama Elena told me you take care of sailors," she said as they stood at the top of the lighthouse, looking out over the ocean that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. "She said you make sure they don't get lost in storms." "That's right," Marcus confirmed, though the conversation felt surreal. His daughter was discussing her dead mother as if Elena were still part of their daily lives, which, in some ways, she was. The basket downstairs contained 7 years of Elena's love, preserved and delivered across impossible circumstances. "Can I help you take care of people, too?" Rose asked. "I could ask the fish to watch for boats that need help. They see everything in the water." The offer was made with such innocent sincerity that Marcus felt his throat tighten again. His daughter wanted to use her extraordinary gift to help people, just as he'd been using his more mundane skills to assist mariners for years. The parallel was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "I think that would be wonderful," he said. "But first, we need to make sure you're safe. There are people who might try to hurt you if they find out what you can do." Rose nodded solemnly. Mama Catherine explained about the bad people. "She says they don't understand that my friends choose to help me. They think I force them, but that's not how it works." "How does it work?" Rose considered the question with the same thoughtful expression Marcus had seen Elena use when explaining complex concepts. "It's like singing with someone who really likes music. We make something beautiful together, and everybody feels happy. But the bad people want me to sing scary songs that would make my friends sad and frightened." The metaphor was simple, but profound. Rose's abilities weren't about control or dominance, but about harmony and mutual cooperation. She could communicate with living things because she approached them with respect and affection, not because she could impose her will upon them, which made the idea of collectors trying to weaponize her gift even more horrific. They would be attempting to turn a beautiful collaboration into a form of slavery, corrupting both Rose and the creatures she loved. "We won't let that happen," Marcus promised, pulling his daughter close. "I'll make sure you're always safe to sing happy songs with your friends." Rose smiled up at him with complete trust, and Marcus felt the full weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. This child had been raised by people who understood her gift and protected her innocence. Now she was his to guard, and he would do whatever was necessary to ensure she never lost that joy in her connection to the living world. When they returned to the main level, Dr. Webb's team had finished their preliminary assessment and were preparing detailed recommendations. The lighthouse would need significant modifications, but nothing that would attract unwanted attention from outside observers. "The biggest challenge," Dr. Webb explained, "is communications security. We need to be able to coordinate with other safe houses without revealing our locations or activities. Standard radio and internet are too vulnerable to interception." "What about quantum encrypted channels?" suggested the team's communications specialist. "Too expensive and too obvious," another team member countered. "If we're supposed to look like a normal Coast Guard weather station, we can't have equipment that screams classified operations." Cormac, who had been quietly listening from across the room, suddenly spoke up. "What if we used the weather computers? I could make them do more than weather." The adults turned to look at the 5-year-old, who was sitting beside his sister Bridget while she drew pictures of the lighthouse with crayons Dr. Webb's team had brought. "Explain what you mean," Dr. Webb encouraged. Cormac approached the weather monitoring station, studying the equipment with the focused attention of a trained technician. "These machines already talk to lots of other machines, right? Weather services, Coast Guard, shipping companies. People expect them to send data." "That's correct," Marcus confirmed. "So what if I taught them to hide messages inside the weather data? Like hiding pictures inside other pictures, but with numbers instead." Cormac's young face was bright with excitement. The bad people would see normal weather reports, but the good people would know how to find the real messages hidden inside. The adults exchanged glances, clearly impressed with the concept. Using existing legitimate communications channels to pass encrypted intelligence was a classic spycraft technique, but having a child who could modify computer systems to implement it without leaving digital traces was unprecedented. "Could you really do that?" Dr. Webb asked. In response, Cormac placed his small hands on the weather monitoring keyboard. Immediately, screens began displaying information that had nothing to do with barometric pressure or wind speed. Instead, detailed schematics appeared showing the lighthouse's defensive positions, evacuation routes, and personnel assignments. "I asked the computers to show me what they think we need to know," Cormac explained matter-of-factly. "They're very smart. They just needed someone to ask them the right questions." Dr. Webb's expression shifted from impressed to amazed. That's not just communication with technology. That's actual interface with artificial intelligence systems. "Computers aren't artificial," Cormac corrected politely. "They're just different. Like how fish think differently than birds, but they're both thinking." The philosophical implications were staggering, but the practical applications were immediately obvious. With Cormac's abilities, the lighthouse could become a communications hub for the entire network without requiring any equipment modifications that would attract attention. "This changes everything," Dr. Webb murmured. "If we can establish secure communications through existing infrastructure, we can coordinate defensive operations across multiple safehouses simultaneously." "Defensive operations?" Fiona asked, bouncing little Aiden on her hip while he played with a toy boat. "The collectors aren't just hunting individual children anymore," Dr. Webb explained grimly. "Our intelligence suggests they're planning coordinated strikes against multiple safehouses, trying to capture as many gifted children as possible in a single operation." Marcus felt cold dread settle in his stomach. When? Soon. Within weeks, possibly days. Dr. Webb looked around the group, her expression grave. "We think they're waiting for something specific, some kind of trigger event or strategic advantage. But when they move, it's going to be massive and simultaneous." Rose had been listening to the adult conversation with growing concern, and now she tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy, are the bad people coming here?" Marcus knelt to her level, choosing his words carefully. "They might try, sweetheart, but we're going to be ready for them. And you have lots of people who will help keep you safe." "Can my friends help too?" Rose asked. "The fish and the birds and the seals." Dr. Webb started to shake her head, clearly thinking that involving marine life in defensive operations was too dangerous for a 4-year-old, but Marcus held up a hand, considering the possibilities. "What kind of help are you thinking about, Rose?" "Well," Rose said thoughtfully, "fish can see underwater where boats are coming from far away, and seabirds can watch the sky and tell us if flying machines are coming, and seals are really smart. They could swim messages to other lighthouses faster than boats." The adults exchanged glances, realizing that Rose had just outlined a biological early warning and communications network that would be impossible for the collectors to detect or disrupt. Traditional surveillance relied on technology that could be jammed or hacked, but a network of living creatures responding to a child's requests would be both invisible and incredibly effective. "That's brilliant," Dr. Webb admitted. "But Rose, you'd have to be very careful not to put your friends in danger." "Oh, I would never do that," Rose said with absolute certainty. "That's why they help me. They know I only ask them to do things that are safe and good." As if to demonstrate, Rose walked to the window facing the ocean and placed her palm against the glass. Within moments, a small school of dolphins appeared in the waters around the lighthouse, leaping and playing in patterns that looked random but somehow felt intentional. "They're happy," Rose reported. "They want to help protect the safe place where the special children live." Marcus watched his daughter coordinating with marine mammals as naturally as other children played with toys, and realized that they weren't just gaining a 4-year-old family member. They were gaining access to an intelligence network that spanned the entire coastal ecosystem. But with that capability came responsibility and danger. If the collectors discovered what Rose could do, they wouldn't just want to capture her. They'd want to control every creature in the ocean. "Dr. Webb," Marcus said quietly, "exactly how much do the collectors know about our children's specific abilities?" Her expression grew troubled. "More than we'd like. They've been studying our network for months. Possibly years. They know about Aiden's empathic range, Bridget's light manipulation, Cormac's technological interface." She paused, looking at Rose. And they definitely know about Rose's connection to marine life. Which means when they come for the lighthouse, they'll come prepared to neutralize biological surveillance and counter marine-based defenses. The implications hit Marcus like a cold wave. His daughter's greatest strength could become a liability if their enemies understood how to exploit it. But perhaps that worked both ways. If the collectors thought they understood Rose's abilities, they might be unprepared for applications that went beyond their intelligence reports. "Rose," Marcus said, kneeling beside his daughter again, "have you ever asked your friends to do things that might surprise grown-ups?" Rose's face lit up with mischief. "Oh, yes. Want to see?" Before anyone could respond, she returned to the window and placed both hands against the glass. This time, instead of dolphins or fish, something much larger began to surface in the waters around the lighthouse. First one, then another, then a third massive shape breaking the surface with gentle grace. Whales. 3 adult humpbacks, each the size of a small ship, floating peacefully in the shallow waters around the lighthouse, as if they were house cats seeking attention. "Whales don't come into shallow water," Dr. Webb said faintly. "They do for me," Rose replied matter-of-factly. "They're my biggest friends. They know everything that happens in the deep ocean, and they can carry messages across the whole world." Marcus stared at the massive creatures floating impossibly close to shore, and realized that his daughter didn't just communicate with marine life. She could convince them to behave in ways that defied their natural instincts, to take risks and make changes they would never consider without her influence. If the collectors were prepared to counter normal marine life patterns, they definitely weren't prepared for whales operating in shallow coastal waters or dolphins coordinating complex surveillance operations. Rose's abilities weren't just communication. They were leadership, inspiration, and trust on a scale that adults could barely comprehend. "This is going to work," Marcus said with growing confidence. "When they come, they'll be expecting to fight humans and technology. They won't be ready to fight the ocean itself." Dr. Webb nodded slowly, a smile beginning to replace her worried expression. "No, they won't be. And by the time they realize what they're up against, it'll be too late." Outside, the 3 whales began to sing, their deep voices carrying across the water in harmonies that seemed to vibrate through the lighthouse itself. Other marine life responded, creating a chorus that felt like nature itself welcoming Rose home. Marcus held his daughter close and looked out at an ocean that no longer seemed empty or hostile, but filled with allies ready to defend the extraordinary children who had found sanctuary at Beacon Point. The collectors might be coming with technology and weapons and tactical advantages, but they were coming to fight a battle on terms they didn't understand, against an enemy they'd never encountered, in a war where the very elements themselves had chosen sides. And for the first time since Dr. Webb had mentioned the approaching threat, Marcus felt something other than dread about the confrontation to come. He felt ready. 3 black helicopters appeared on the horizon at dawn, moving in perfect formation toward Beacon Point. Marcus spotted them through his binoculars while making his routine morning patrol, their sleek military design unmistakable against the pale sky. His blood ran cold as tactical memories flooded back from his merchant marine days. "They're here," he called into his radio, using the coded phrase Dr. Webb's team had established. Inside the lighthouse, he knew Fiona would be moving the children to their prepared positions while the adults activated defense protocols they drilled for weeks. Aiden had sensed them first, of course. The 3-year-old had woken at 5 a.m. crying about angry people in the sky, his empathic abilities detecting hostile intentions from miles away. But Marcus had hoped they'd have more time to implement Rose's biological surveillance network. The collectors had moved faster than anticipated. Marcus sprinted toward the lighthouse as the helicopters spread into attack formation. Through the windows, he could see Cormac at the communication station, his small hands dancing over keyboards as he coordinated with other safe houses through their hidden network. Bridget stood ready by the windows, prepared to bend light itself if they needed concealment. And Rose knelt by the large ocean-facing window, both palms pressed against the glass, her eyes closed in deep concentration. The water around the lighthouse had begun to churn with activity as her marine allies responded to her silent call. "Status report," Dr. Webb demanded as Marcus burst through the door. 3 military helicopters, approximately 2 minutes out. "Standard assault formation." Marcus grabbed his rifle from the weapons locker they'd installed behind Elena's photograph. "They're not trying to be subtle." "Good," Dr. Webb replied grimly. "Arrogance makes them predictable." The first helicopter swooped low over the lighthouse, its rotor wash rattling windows as armed figures rappelled onto the rocky ground surrounding the building. Marcus counted at least 12 operatives, all moving with professional precision toward predetermined positions. But they weren't prepared for what happened next. Rose opened her eyes, and the ocean erupted. Hundreds of seals surged from the water, their barking creating a cacophony that drowned out helicopter noise while they swarmed the landing zones. The operatives found themselves surrounded by hundreds of pounds of angry marine mammals, their tactical formations instantly disrupted. "Phase 2, Rose whispered, and dolphins began launching themselves from the water, their powerful bodies slamming into the legs of anyone trying to advance toward the lighthouse. The collector's weapons were useless against targets that disappeared beneath the waves before they could be targeted. One helicopter pilot tried to gain altitude for a better firing position, but massive shapes began surfacing around his aircraft. 3 humpback whales had positioned themselves in the shallow water, their songs creating vibrations that interfered with the helicopter's instruments. "Impossible!" Marcus heard one of the collectors shout over their radio frequency, which Cormac had helpfully patched through the lighthouse's speakers. The intel said she could communicate with fish, not coordinate military operations with marine mammals. Dr. Webb smiled coldly. Their intelligence was incomplete. The second helicopter attempted to land further from shore, but Bridget stepped to the window and raised her hands. Sunlight bent around her fingers like liquid gold, creating a blinding glare that made precision flying impossible. The pilot, temporarily blinded, pulled up hard to avoid crashing into the lighthouse. Meanwhile, Aiden had positioned himself where he could sense the emotions of every collector within his range. "The leader is scared," he reported in his small voice. "He's calling for backup because nothing is working like they planned." "Where is he?" Marcus asked, scanning the chaos outside. "Third helicopter, still in the air." "He feels angry and confused." Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. He activated his radio and broadcast on the collector's frequency. "Attention, hostile aircraft. You are trespassing on United States Coast Guard property. Withdraw immediately, or face consequences." The leader's voice crackled back, filled with fury. "We know what you're hiding, lighthouse keeper. Give us the children and we'll leave peacefully." "Counter-proposal," Marcus replied, watching Rose direct her marine allies with the calm confidence of a natural commander. "Leave now, and I won't let my daughter show you what whales can do to aircraft." As if summoned by his words, one of the massive humpbacks lifted its head above the surface, water cascading from its ancient face as it regarded the helicopters with intelligent eyes. The sight of a creature that could weigh 40 tons, studying them with obvious intent, made even the professional soldiers hesitate. "You have 30 seconds, Marcus continued. "After that, my family stops playing nice." The leader's helicopter circled once more, clearly weighing options. But Rose had been preparing something beyond even Marcus's expectations. She stood and walked to the lighthouse's highest window, pressing both hands against the glass with such intensity that the structure itself seemed to vibrate. Every seabird within 50 miles began converging on Beacon Point. The sky darkened with wings as thousands of gulls, terns, pelicans, and cormorants formed a living storm cloud above the helicopters. They moved in perfect coordination, creating patterns that would have been impossible without Rose's guiding influence. "Sir," one of the helicopter pilots radioed to his commander, "we need to withdraw. This isn't natural phenomena. Someone is weaponizing the entire ecosystem." But the leader was desperate now, his carefully planned operation falling apart. "All units, focus fire on the lighthouse structure. If we can't take them, we'll bring the building down." The first burst of automatic weapons fire shattered windows and splintered wooden frames. Marcus threw himself over Rose, shielding her with his body as bullets whined overhead. Fiona gathered the other children behind the sturdy stone foundation, while Dr. Webb's team returned fire with professional precision. But Rose wasn't finished. She looked up at Marcus from beneath his protective embrace, her eyes filled not with fear but with sad determination. "Daddy, they're trying to hurt my family." "I know, sweetheart. We'll keep you safe." "No," Rose said softly. "I'll keep us safe." She stood despite the gunfire, walking calmly to the shattered window that faced the ocean. When she placed her hands on the broken glass, drops of her blood from minor cuts began to glow with the same warm light that had filled Elena's basket. The ocean responded like never before. Every whale within 100 miles began to sing, their voices creating harmonics that resonated through the water and up through the rocky foundation of Beacon Point. The sound was so deep, so powerful, that it seemed to come from the earth itself. And then they began to surface. Not just the 3 humpbacks that had been helping, but dozens of them. Fin whales, blue whales, right whales, even a pod of orcas that had traveled from deeper waters. They surrounded the lighthouse in a protective circle, their massive forms creating a biological fortress that no human weapon could penetrate. The helicopter pilots, faced with the largest gathering of marine mammals in recorded history, finally understood that they were not fighting children and their guardians. They were fighting the ocean itself, guided by a 4-year-old girl who saw all living things as family worth protecting. "Withdraw, withdraw, withdraw," the leader finally ordered, his voice cracking with defeat. "All units, immediate extraction." The helicopters pulled back, their pilots refusing to engage targets that included creatures weighing more than most buildings. As they disappeared toward the horizon, the marine mammals began to disperse, but slowly, maintaining their protective positions until the threat was completely gone. Rose collapsed into Marcus's arms, exhausted by the effort of coordinating such a massive response. "Did we win, Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus whispered, holding his daughter close while whales sang victory songs in the waters around their home. "We won." Dr. Webb approached them, her expression mixing awe with professional assessment. That wasn't just communication with marine life. That was tactical coordination on a scale we've never seen. Rose didn't just ask for help. She created a unified command structure spanning hundreds of miles of ocean. Marcus looked down at his daughter, who had fallen asleep against his chest with the exhaustion of someone who had given everything to protect her family. "She's 4 years old." "She's extraordinary," Dr. Webb corrected. "And after what just happened, every collector network in the world will know it." This was just the first wave. But as Marcus gazed out at the peaceful ocean where his daughter's allies continued their protective patrol, he realized something important had changed. He was no longer the isolated lighthouse keeper who had spent 7 years hiding from life. He was the father of an extraordinary child, part of a community that protected the impossible, guardian of gifts that could change the world. Fiona appeared beside him with hot coffee and a blanket for Rose. The other safe houses are reporting similar attacks, all repelled successfully. Cormac's communication network allowed perfect coordination. And the children? All safe. All together. All part of something larger than any of us understood. Fiona smiled as she watched Aidan and Bridget help Cormac monitor communications, their abilities working in perfect harmony. Elena would be proud. Marcus thought of his wife's letter, her hope that love could transform loss into something beautiful. Looking around at the family they'd built from tragedy and circumstance, he realized she'd been right about everything. The lighthouse beam continued its eternal rotation, but now it guided more than just ships through dangerous waters. It welcomed extraordinary children to sanctuary, coordinated networks of protection that spanned continents, and served as a beacon for those who understood that some gifts were worth any sacrifice to preserve. Rose stirred in his arms and looked up with sleepy eyes. "Daddy, the whales want to know if they should stay close, just in case." Marcus gazed out at the ocean that had become their ally, at the creatures who had chosen to protect his daughter, at the community that had welcomed him into purposes he'd never imagined. "Tell them thank you, but they can go home now. We'll call if we need them." "They say they'll always come when family needs help," Rose murmured, then fell back asleep with the complete trust of a child who knew she was loved beyond measure. As the sun set over Beacon Point, painting the sky in colors that rivaled Elena's memory basket, Marcus understood that some storms brought destruction, but others brought exactly what was needed most. His daughter was safe, his family was complete, and the ocean itself had chosen to stand guard over the extraordinary gifts they protected together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.